Okay, so good morning. Today's daf is daf Kuf Nun Vav in Bava Basra. We are closing in on the completion of Bava Basra. We'll actually get to the last Mishnah of the ninth Perek, God willing, today. And or at least maybe we'll end with it today. We'll see how far we get. And let me share my screen and we'll really get started. So where are we and what have we been doing? We've been talking, although this chapter has significantly been about deathbed gifts, gifts of a shchivmira, somebody who's very ill. Over the last 2 days, we've been discussing the sale of a father's estate by a teenage son, and to the extent to which we say that that's something that the son is able to do or unable to do. And so as we pick up on the eighth line of Daf Kuf Nun Vav Amud Aleph, with Amar of Nachman, it's the middle of the line. So the Gemara is going to note a variety of rules where we must first confirm that presence or absence of physical majority. So, as I'm sure we've gone over several times over the last couple days, a boy reaches the age of majority at 13 and a day, and at the same time must also exhibit the signs of majority, namely two pubic hairs. And the same thing is true for a girl, except that we do that at the age of 12 and a day. Um, and so, with that background, we're going to see that sometimes that's the key moment that you need to have those two aspects, two qualities, the number of years and the pubic hairs, and then you're going to be treated as an adult, and that will matter for certain things. But when it comes to the sale of a father's estate, we'll see that that actually it has a different age that's associated with it. So here we go. Amar of Nachman, Amar Shmuel. So Rav Nachman said in the name of Shmuel, Bodkin lekedushin, legerishin, vilachalitza, vilamiyun, that for the four things, for the following four things, we are going to need to check to confirm that they have that these individuals have have both the age and the number of hairs. And so let's take a look, and we'll see that Rashbam helps us out here. And so uh, so we're now Ligarishin. It's 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11. I'm sorry. First, we'll start with Bodkin Likadushin. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7 lines down, end of the line in the narrow lines of the Rashbam. Bodkin Likadushin, we have to check for Kedushin. Af al Pishahu ben Yud Gimel, even though somebody Shanim is 13 years old, the Yom Echad, along with one additional day. Va'isha bas Yud Beis Shanim v'Yom Echad, and the girl is 12 in a day. Lo samchinan ashanim. We don't rely on just the years la'achazukinu in order to say that it's a chazaka with them kegedolim, that they should be treated like an adult. Ubnei seyar, and therefore, and that they have the necessary hairs. Hichashev kedushin vadai, to treat their marriage as a certain marriage. Af lahakel, even to be lenient, kagon levatel kedushe asheni, because shekidesh acharav, in order to nullify a second kedushin. Now we know when it comes to a man biblically is allowed to marry multiple wives, but a woman is only allowed to marry one husband. So what happens if she actually goes ahead after marrying her first husband while the husband is still alive and she tries to do kedushin with the second husband? The answer is that the kedushin is meaningless. That kedushin does nothing. But it's only true that it does nothing if we are certain about the first marriage. And so as a result, in order to apply the leniency of allowing this woman to not view the second Kedushin that she did as having any meaning, which is lenient because it allows her to be with her original husband, we need to know for certain that the first husband and the wife were both adults at the time in order for it to work. Shekidish akara below get, because that all right, levatel kedusha shen shekidish akara below get, without a get. I meaning, obviously, if she were to if the marriage, the second marriage, were to have some validity, well, then she would need a divorce decree, a get. Ella bodkin acharav im hevi sa'arot az yachshavu kedushe vadai. So we have to check to see whether each of them is an adult in order to confirm that the first marriage is a certain marriage. So that's with respect to marriage. Continuing on in the Rashbam, next Rashbam.
How do we understand this week's Torah portion when Rivka was 3 years old, according to the Meforshim?
So a father is
How do we
allowed
say she's married?
a father is allowed to marry off a daughter when she's a minor. Biblically, that is permitted. And if you want to say that, well, when second, her father died because Betuel is not mentioned again, and so maybe she was married off by her brother and sisters, that is a rabbinic marriage, and it is, and we'll see that the although the daughter, the minor daughter, has the ability to undo that marriage until she turns 12 and reaches the age of majority with the two pubic hairs. It doesn't mean that she has to. So you're absolutely right that it could be that depending on, of course, now remember the Torah never tells us Rivka's age. Where you're highlighting the Midrash, and where it says that Rivka was 3 years old when she got married. But even if that's true, and even if it was true that her father died, which again also Midrash. Then you would still be able to say that it's still a rabbinic marriage, and a rabbinic marriage is a totally valid marriage during the time that she does not perform the act that's referred to as miyun, which we'll talk about in just a moment. So it's absolutely fine. But you're absolutely right that it's an interesting connection to this week's parsha, that maybe the marriage that Yitzchak and Rivka had during the first 9 years of their marriage was not in fact a full-fledged biblical marriage, according to based on the Midrash. So you're absolutely right to raise that. It might not have been, but that doesn't mean that there was anything wrong in it, or that there was something there was something impossible. But if she had accepted kedushin, if we, and again, that also assumes that all the avot performed all the mitzvot as we are required to do them. And so that doesn't necessarily mean that that's the case also. But if we assume that that's also the case, that all three of those things were true, then you're absolutely right that if she had performed a second kedushin with somebody else during those minor years before she performed miyun, then yes, you're absolutely right. She wouldn't need a divorce from a second. From that second husband, because she was only married rabbinically. Okay. So that was the first item that we listed in the list. Now we go to the second item, Villagerishin. We're going to explain why it was necessary. After all, you checked the people when they got married. So why do you need to check them again when they get divorced? Because you cannot revert from being an adult to being a minor. Ula chalitza, and for chalitza, kidamar farish lekame, as we are about to explain, de mishum isha nakatla, that be shalo tachlots ad shetagdil v'tavi simane seyar, so that because it specifically uses the word isha in the connection with the psukim of chalitza. So as a result, she needs to be an adult with the necessary signs. Ulamiyun, now the fourth and final item in our list of where the age of majority makes a difference. In the first three, of course, we wanted the person to be an adult in order to perform the action. When it comes to miyun, it's the opposite. Im heviya sa'arot, continuing on in the Rashbam, im heviya sa'arot lo timain. Of course, if she once she becomes an adult, once she has those hairs, she can no longer perform miyun. And again, miyun is the divorce associated with a minor refusing to stay married to a man she married after her father died and is set up by her brothers slash mother. So again, although from the Torah, a father has the ability to marry off a minor daughter biblically, and as a result, it would be a full-fledged marriage. When it comes to if the father is no longer alive, and now the brothers and mother try to set her up, and of course, the Torah wanted to enable that because in those days poverty was so intense that you wanted to marry off your daughters to potentially enable them to have a good life when you are when the rest of the family is suffering and not have to try and raise funds to feed them. So you want her to be a part of somebody else's family. So that would be a common way of trying to avoid the issue. But the bottom line is, in each of these four items, we see that the ability to do that turns on whether or not the full age of majority has been reached, and we need to confirm whether or not the persons involved have the necessary pubic hair. Okay, but there's one where it doesn't make a difference. The limkor, back into the Gemara. It's now 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10 lines down, second word on the line. The limkor b'nichsei aviv, but when it comes to selling the father's property, ad sheyeh ben esrim, you have to wait until you're 20. All right, so now the Gemara is going to go through each of the items. The kevan debadkana likedushin legerishin lamali. So 1 second, why in the world do you need to check for gerushin, for divorce, if you already checked for marriage? So lo nitzrucha el. There's one situation where a male under the age of 13 can get biblically married, and that is in connection with yibum. Ditanan ben tesha shanim v'yom echad. If a boy is 9 years and a day, sheba al yivamta, he has relations with his dead brother's wife, and the dead brother had no children. So then that relationship, kina'ah, he actually quote unquote acquires her. He becomes her husband. Ve'ein no sein get ad sheyigdal, but he cannot give her a get. He cannot divorce her until he becomes an adult, because that marriage is a biblical marriage, and it cannot be undone until you can do a biblical divorce, and that requires the age of majority. So now we continue with the next item on the list. What about chalitza? L'chalitza mid'apuke mid'Rabbi Yossi. This highlights that the halacha that when Shmuel said this, he was saying, when Rabbi Nachman said it in the name of Shmuel, when Shmuel taught it over, he was trying to highlight that we don't follow Rabbi Yossi, because the Amar Ish Kasav B'Parsha. Rabbi Yossi says that because it says Ish in the pasuk, that's where it talks about chalitza, and the pasuk says V'im lo yachpotz ha'ish lakachas es yivimto. If the man does not want to marry his brother's wife, so then that teaches us that it's only an adult male who must be 13 in order to perform chalitza. Aval isha ben gedola ben ketana. But an isha, a woman, she can do chalitza whether she's an adult or a minor. Kamash malan. So it comes to teach us demakshinan ish isha leish, that we connect the word isha to ish, and so just as the man must be an adult to perform chalitza, so too the woman must be an adult in order to perform chalitza. Delok Rabbi Yossi, unlike Rabbi Yossi. So I may have said earlier that the pasuk said isha. I meant that this was the this is the drasha that teaches us isha. Okay, so
How does that
again,
work for a gerushin? If the woman is a minor when she gets married, the 3 years old, 5 years old, because the brothers marry her, she's miyun, and then she is father, brother, what? Then
well, the father,
she
it's
get,
a big difference because
I
the
know,
father
saying okay,
marrying
he can
her.
marry her, but then if she uh if she gets somehow married a second time. So we just said she cannot divorce until she becomes an adult. So let's say she's 5 years old. Does she have to wait 7 years to divorce the second one?
If her brothers and sister marry her, and then um somebody else performs kedushin with her, then you're absolutely right that in fact the first marriage is only rabbinic. I'm pretty sure that in the second marriage now also will take hold, and she will need to wait until she's 12 years old to divorce the second man in order to be able to be back with the first. I believe that that's the case. Okay.
How can she remain married to both of them for seven
She
years?
well, she can't. The problem is she remember first of all two things. One is kedushin is the moment before engaging in any sexual
Right,
relation.
right.
So she can you can she she technically she can have suffix kedushin with two men, and that's her situation. And because she has suffix kedushin with two men, she cannot do nisuin with either of them, and as a result, she needs to just stay in limbo until she's able to engage in a divorce. Now, if the husband is an adult, it may be well, if the father's alive, so then it would have been a biblical marriage, and so it wouldn't the second condition wouldn't apply. But when we have this second case, I believe that we need to wait. Now I'm not remembering what we learned in Maseches Gittin, but it may be that we need to wait until she's 12, and she can't marry either of them. She can't be with either of them, but and she's effectively in a terrible limbo until she turns 12 and is able to accept the divorce. So you're absolutely right that that could potentially happen. Okay. So we said, explain that, look, for Chalitza, we're excluding the position of Rabbi Yossi, who only requires that the man be an adult, not that the woman be an adult. Ume'iyun, what about me'inunin? That when it comes to miyun, la pukim into Rabbi Yehuda. This excludes the view of Rabbi Yehuda. De Amar, because Rabbi Yehuda said, Ad Yirba Shachor, that the relevant age is not the bringing of the two hairs, but rather you need to actually have a lot of black. Now, what does that mean? Take a look 7 lines up in the Rashbam. Hashachor, Kamash Malan Delo Rabbi Yehuda. So that's what the Divrei Maskell is. Mesekas Nida. When in Mesekas Nida, Mefarish we explain Ad Shir Yirbo Hasaros until there's enough hair. The Yushokvot that it would be that the hair is long enough that it lies flat. The Nira, and therefore the area appears Kamosha here Bahashachor, like there's it's dark down there. If one imagines unhaired covered skin, so then that's going to be skin colored. But if there's hair covering the skin, well, then if there's sufficient hair, the area develops the color of the hair, and that's what we're talking about. You need to have that. And a girl, according to Rabbi Yehuda, can perform miyun until that exists. And so back into the Gemara, Kamash Malan. One now we're from the bottom of from before the Mishnah. It's 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6 lines up from before the Mishnah. Kamash Malan Delo Rabbi Yehuda. It's weird that so now we're learning that we don't paskin like Rabbi Yehuda. All right, and now the final of the 5 lessons we had. Remember we had 5 different lessons. 4 that we need that the age of majority requires the hairs. And now we have the 5th, Velimkor benichsei aviv ad ben esrim. That when it comes to marrying off, I'm sorry, when it comes to selling off the estate of the father, you have to be 20 years old. La pukim imanda amr ben shmona esrei, and this is excluding the position that said you need to be 18. So therefore, we've gotten all of the conclusions out of Rav Nachman in the name of Shmuel. So let's hear what the halacha is. The hilchasa tochzman kilif neisman. So the halacha is that during the time, meaning during the 20th year, from age 19 plus a day until the end of that year, until the day you turn 20, all of that is like the time before you turn 19, meaning you cannot actually sell the property until you turn 20 and a day. The Hilchasa Kegidol Bar Menashe, and the halacha is like Gidol Bar Menashe. Now remember, Gidol Bar Menashe said that, or it had asked the question and about a girl who was 14 years old and had the knowledge to do business, and would that constitute a valid sale? And the response was absolutely, it is. And so the point is that the halacha is like that. That if you have a minor who knows how to engage in business, well, then the sale of the father's land, even before the age of 20, will be a valid sale. The Hilchasa Marzutra, and the halacha is like Marzutra. The Marzutra was the one who said that a 13-year-old plus a day boy can testify about movable property but not land, and so that's the halacha. In fact, he can testify about movable property, but he can't testify about land until he turns 20. The hilchasa amemar, and the halacha is like amemar, namely that a 13-year-old boy has the ability to give gifts. Even though he cannot sell his father's estate, he has the ability to give away real property from the estate. So that was the halakha as well. V'ilchaza karav Nachman Amar Shmuel bekulo. And again, everything that we said today, that we began with, that was all Rav Nachman. All five of those rules, that the halakha is like them as well. And indeed, if we take a look at the Rashbam here, the Hilchasa, it's 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6 lines into the wide lines at the bottom of the Rashbam on Kufnun Vavam and Aleph. The Hilchasa Rav Nachman Amar Shmuel Bekulho, that the halacha is like Rav Nachman in the name of Shmuel. This is the Rashbam that we cited yesterday in the Tosfos at the beginning of yesterday's daf. Kedushin, when it comes to Kedushin, Vigerishin, and it comes to divorce, when it comes to marriage and divorce, and Chalitza, Umiyun, and all four of those categories, Delo Samchinan Ashanim, we don't rely on the number of years. Ad Shenivdok, until we check Simanin on the signs. The Limkor B'Nechsei Aviv, and when it comes to the sale of a father's estate, Ad Sheyeh Ben Esrim, they need to be 20 years old. The Simanim, and also have the signs. It's not enough even to just be 20, because Misha Enu Yodea. And we're talking about Misha Eni Yodea Betiv Masa Umata, somebody who doesn't know how to engage in business. Detvei Me'esrim Lo Amtu Rabbanan Lahamtin L'chachmat To, because we don't require somebody to wait to more than 20 to assume his sufficient knowledge. The Im Lo Hevi Seer. However, if that 20-year-old still does not yet have the signs of puberty, of the pubic hairs, so then be'esrim, at the age of 20, nechzakinan kikatan, we can treat him like a minor ad rov shnosav, until he gets to the majority of years. And again, Rashbam said that he viewed it as 36 years. By the way, there's a debate, because some people say that 35 years and a day would be sufficient. Again, Rashbam said 36 years. Im lo nimsu bo simne saris. If, of course, he has not at the same time developed the signs of a saris. A saris, again, would have no beard hair, or a saris would have very smooth skin, all indicating a lack of puberty. And if those signs existed, well, then we would treat this saris as an adult, as a saris. And one can say, Davka aviv, that all of this is only when it comes to the property that is inherited from a father. Aval b'nechasim. But when it comes to other property, shenatnu lo, that was given to this young man b'matana as a present, o shekana metaltalin, or if he acquires movable property, she'enim yerushas avosav, that isn't from his father's inheritance, hanu mocher pachos miben esrim kedin metaltalin, then he would be able to sell these like other property, like a general rule where we allow even a minor as young as 6 or 7, depending on their intelligence, to engage in business and to sell movable property. Okay, so that brings us to the next Mishnah. The next Mishnah highlights that the laws regarding shchivmira, again, most of this parak has been talking about the law of a shchivmira, somebody who's deathly ill and wants to give away property in advance of their death. And we've seen that the majority opinion is that if you and the halacha is that if you give away all of your property, then even if you don't mention that you're doing it because one is deathly ill, then it's considered a gift conditioned on death, and it does not it does not require either the writing of a document or the engaging of a kinyan. But that is not a universal opinion. The other, by the way, and the other situation is if one were to specifically mention that the reason that they're giving the gift is because of their health situation, that they're likely to die, then also we assume that it's conditioned on death, and that would apply even if it's a partial bequest. Even if it's a partial bequest, we would do that. But the bottom line is that we're about to see that Rebbe Lazar disagrees and does not have these same rules when it comes to a shchivmira. So hamechalik nechasiv al piv, when it comes to somebody who distributes their property, and we're assuming at the moment that potentially that they're distributing all of their property, and they do so orally. Rabbi Elazar Omer, Echad Bari, the Echad Mesukan, whether the person's healthy, whether the person's ill, doesn't make a difference. Nechasim sheyesh lahen achrayas, when it comes to property that is subject to a potential lien, that's meaning real property. Niknin b'chesed b'shtar b'chazaka. You need to have money, a contract, a document, or a chazaka, an act of ownership needs to happen for the transfer to be effective. Without that, even though the shchivmira may have said something, it's not enough. You need a kinyan. V'she'ein lahen achrayas, and when it comes to property that does not have an encumbrance, meaning movable property, ein niknan ela b'shicha. Then the only way you can acquire it is through drawing near. Now, although it's used the only kind of language in both of these cases, this is not to say that Rebbe Lazar necessarily says that a Kinyan Sudar would not work for everything, because in general, everybody agrees that a Kinyan Sudar will work generally, except when it comes to cash. Cash cannot be acquired with a Kinyan Sudar, but for everything else, it would work. These are just the items that are dedicated, the methods of acquisition that are dedicated. But let's take a look in the Rashbam. Rebbe Lazar Omer Echad Bari ve'Echad Mesukan. First Rashbam on the Mishnah. Rebbe Lazar Svirale le'inyan shchivmira, that when it comes to somebody who's very ill, Einam kiksuvim v'ksurin klal. It's not as if it was written and given at all. Unlike everybody else would say that even just the oral statement is sufficient to cause something to be treated as if it was written and given. Ela kabari ba'alma, but rather we treat somebody who is ill as if they were completely healthy. And therefore, v'tzara kinyan, kishar matanas bari. And therefore, this gift of a shchimira requires a kinyan, just like any gift of a healthy person. The afal gaf de mace. And even if the person were to die, the donor were to die, lo kana makabel matana, the recipient of the present would not have acquired anything below kinyan if there wasn't a kinyan. Vafilu mitzvah machwas mita nami, and remember, we said that there are two kinds of gifts of a shchemira. There's one where you don't mention anything. That's what we're calling matana shchemira. But there's also the gift of a mitzvah machmas misa, of when you specifically say that I'm worried that I'm going to die, and therefore I want to give this gift. And so as a result, that gift, even if it's partial, we're going to say that it's a gift of a that it will take effect if the person dies. Rabbi Elazar, according to Rabbi Elazar, when it comes to that kind of gifts, by kinyan, you need a kinyan. Shaharei Maisa Shel Iman Shel Bnei Ruchel, because we're going to see the case of the mother of the sons of Ruchel, who had passed away. Ukimnan le'el, we already set up above, although we will note that there are two possibilities in a few moments. B'mitzvah machmas misa, that was a case of mitzvah machmas misa, meaning that the mother explicitly said that she wanted her brooch to go to her daughter because she was about to die. And nevertheless, Palag Rabbi Lazar. Rabbi Lazar disagrees. Va'amar lahu l'chachamim, and he says to the chachamim, B'nei Ruchel tikavram, that the B'nei Ruchel were evil people that should be buried, tikavram imam, that their mother should have buried, meaning that that's how bad they were. V'shalokidin, and really, we weren't supposed to give the brooch to the daughter because there was no kinyan done, and so as a result, the brooch should have gone to the sons. But because they were so wicked, that was why the rabbis gave it to the daughter anyway. Kimu divareha. So as a result, they fulfilled her words. Ki'im lekonsam, just because they wanted to punish them. So let's get to that story, because Amrulo, as we turn to Kuf Nun Vav Amud Bet, and we hear the story of the rabbis telling to Rebbe Lazar to try and disprove Rebbe Lazar's position. One second, what about the following case? Maisa be'iman shel b'nei Ruchel. There was the story of the mother of the sons of Rochel. Shahaisa chola, she was sick. V'amra, and she said, Tenu, Tenu, kavinasi leviti. Give the kavina, the brooch that I have, to my daughter. V'hi b'shnei mana, and it's worth 12 mana. So she was saying, I know exactly what it's worth, and I want it to go. The Mesa, and then she died. So when it comes to a matana shchemera, we would have to say, well, let's take a look in the we'll look in the Rashbam in a moment. He's going to highlight two ways that we can read this, but again, in the end, we're going to read it that this is a situation where she said, I know that I'm going to die, and therefore I want this to happen. The Mesa, and she died. The Kimwes Dvareha, and the rabbis fulfilled her wishes. So before we get to Rabbi Lazar's response, let's take a look at the second Rashbam. Well, we can look at the top Rashbam also. We'll go through the first two Rashbams. Bnei Rochel Shem Avian. That's their father's name is Rochel. The Shahaisa Chola and this mother Shahaisa Chola Amra Tinasi Tinatain Kavinasi Leviti. Give the Kavina, the brooch, to my daughter. If this was a gift of a shchivmira below shiur without anything remaining haita, if we can, because there are two ways to read it. We can say that maybe this was a gift. This was the last item that the mother owned. And so as a result, it would be considered a gift of a shchivmira because there was nothing left over. In that situation, we could say, Demo Rebbe Lazar b'mitzvah machmas misa, that Rebbe Lazar would agree when it comes to a mitzvah machmas misa, that a gift where one explicitly mentions their impending death, where even if it's not Delo by Kinyan, that you also don't require a Kinyan, and he would agree that you don't require a Kinyan, Behu de Mace, and in a situation where the person actually dies. Dehalomi by Okume Maisa de Bnei Rochel b'mitzvah machmas misa, because we don't have to say that the situation of the Bnei Rochel is talking about a situation where the mother said explicitly that she was about to die. The ima tanaschimira b'miktzas. However, if in fact this were actually a gift, a partial gift, and it was not all of her possessions, haita umi boy lan lukume b'mitzvah machmas misa. In this situation, then we would need to say that this is a situation where the mother explicitly mentioned her impending death, as we actually set up in the Gemara. Because when it comes to a gift of a shchimera that's a partial gift that does not complete the estate, kuli alma, everybody agrees, kula alma modim, everybody agrees, delo mikneya ba'amira. It's not a kinyan with just speaking. V'im kain, and if that were true, al karkov palig Rebbe Lazar, afilu b'mitzvah machmas misa. In which case, we would say that Rebbe Lazar would disagree, even in a case of mitzvah machmas misa. And of course, that's the way we set up the Gemara earlier. So presumably, we're going to say that in fact Rebbe Lazar disagrees even about mitzvah machmas misa. And now, Amr Lahen. And so what did Rebbe Lazar say back? B'nei Rochel to Kabrei Miman. The sons of Rachel, they were so bad that their mother should bury them. Now, what exactly does that mean? Let's take a look. And again, back into the Rashbam. The next Rashbam, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. End of the sixth line. Amr Lahen ein mevian raya mibnei Rochel. The Rashbam reads a couple of additional words into the Mishnah and says that he's saying that you can't bring a proof from the sons of Rochel to Rishayim Hayu because they were wicked. The halavai should tikabrem, and oh, it would be great if they should be tikabrem imam, if their mother would have buried them. Mafarish time of the Gemara, as we're going to explain in the Gemara, we'll give the exact sin that they did in the Gemara. The kanzu, and the fact that the sons didn't get the brooch is because it was a penalty to consume rabbanan. The rabbis at that time punish them l'kayem tanas imam in order to fulfill the wish of the mother lebita to her daughter below kinyan, even though there was no kinyan. But really, the halacha is not like that. And therefore, the sons should have gotten it. And it's only because of those special circumstances. And so, therefore, Rebbe Lazar says you can't bring a proof. Okay. Now we go to the Gemara, and the Gemara tells us brisa where we hear the story of where Rebbe Lazar brings support for his position. So
what do you say? The halacha is like whom? I mean, they said the halacha was that the
halacha is not like Rebbe Lazar. The halacha is not like Rebbe Lazar. Okay,
so that it should have gone the.
So the halacha was that the mother's gift was done halakhically, and we're not going to say that the sons of Rochel were actually sinners. And again, we'll get to that at the end of today. So Tanya, so we learned in a brisa. Now, even though the Gemara has the word Eliezer here, if we take a look in the Mesoras Hashas at the letter Gimel, Tzarach Lomer El Azar. The point is that this brisa should be consistent with our Mishnah, and so El Azar should be the reading here, and V'chein Isa B'kedushin Kavav Bet B'kakasav Tos. But so the bottom line is we're going to read El Azar into the Gemara the rest of the way through, and so I wanted to highlight that. So Amar Lahen Rabbi Lazar l'chachamim. So again, the same Rabbi Lazar from our Mishnah said to the chachamim, Ma'aseh b'Meroni. There's this first person from Meron, Echad Shahaya b'Yerushalayim, that was in Yerushalayim. V'hayu lo metaltel in Harbei b'Bikesh l'tneim, and he had a lot of property that he wanted to give away, but matana is a gift. Amrulo, and the people there said to him that it's going to be hard for you to do that. Ein lahem takana achi yikaneh al gav karga. You need to have land in order to transfer this property because the person that you want to transfer it to is not present. And so as a result, there's no method for you to transfer it to that person otherwise. So halach b'lakach beit selah Echad Samach Yerushalayim. So he went and bought some land, some rocky land near Yerushalayim. And Rashbam explains that because it's rocky, it wasn't fit for planting, and that's why it was very inexpensive, because he didn't need the land from a land perspective. He was just trying to use that land as a method of transferring property. V'amar, and he said, Tzifono leploni, the northern part of that land goes to Ploni, goes to X, the imo, and with it meyatzonu mea chavios, and he gave with it 100 sheep and 100 barrels. Udromo leploni, and the southern side goes to Y, the imo meyatzonu mea chavios, and he also gave 100 barrels and 100 sheep to the person on the southern side. The Kimul Chachamim Estvarav, and the rabbis fulfilled his words. So Amru Lo, and so isn't this a highlight that even though presumably according to Rebbe Lazar, this person from Meron was a shchiv meira, and yet he was unable to perform his desired actions without making an acquisition, without actually performing a kinyan. So doesn't that show that I'm right, that a kinyan is necessary even when it comes to some kind of matana shchiv meira? Amrulo, they said back to Rabbi Lazar, of course not. Misham Raya, you're trying to bring a proof from that. Meironi Bari Haya. Meironi was a healthy person, and he got sick and died after that. So that's not a proof at all. Everybody agrees that a healthy person's gift requires a kinyan. So all right. So now we go on. So Amar Lahen b'nei Rochel tikabrem iman. So we said that the Lazar said that the mothers should bury their sons. So why should this mother bury her sons? My time a kalayat lahu. Why did Rebbe Lazar curse them? Amar Rav Yehuda, Amar Shmuel, mikaime kotzin b'cherem hayu. These sons, they would maintain thorns in their vineyard. Now, there's a biblical prohibition of kalai hakerem, of having multiple things growing in a vineyard. And again, Rebbe Lazar l'taimei, and Rebbe Lazar was following his reason. Ditnan, because we have a Mishnah. This is a Mishnah in Klayim Parakeh Mishnah Chet. Hamikayim kotzim becherem, that if you allow the thorns to remain and give them support in your vineyard, Rebbe Lazar Omer, Kadesh, you have effectively, Kadesh usually means sanctified, but Kadesh is also used in connection with Klayim to indicate that it now becomes prohibited to benefit from. So it is prohibited to benefit from this, from this vineyard and the thistles and the thorns. So the Chachamim Omer, but the Chachamim saying no, that's not necessarily lo kadesh. You don't have that kind of sanctification. You don't have that condemnation, the situation where you're not going to be able to benefit. Ella davar shekamo mekaimin, only something that most people will maintain. So, and obviously thorns is not something that most people maintain. So bishlama kirkum chazi. Now, one second. Let's understand Elazar better, because we can understand when it comes to some kind of crocus that it's got some kind of fit for it. Elakotzim lamai chazi. Why would anybody maintain the thorns? So I'm Rabbi Chanina, my time of the Rebbe Elazar. What's the reasoning of Rebbe Elazar? Shekain ba'arvia mikaimen kotzim b'shad sados l'gamalehen. No, because those thorn bushes are treated as food for camels in Arabia, and so as a result, as Rashbam says, Shekain ba'Arabia. It's from the bottom of the narrow lines. It's about 15 lines up. The Rabbanan Basar Ruva de Alma Asli. The rabbis don't say that we focus on a particular location, but they follow the majority of the world. She'ena Mekaimin Sados L'Gamalayhem. That we don't, where people don't, they won't keep the thorns in their field for their camels, and therefore that's not going to be sufficient. But for Rebbe Lazar, it was sufficient. And so as a result, these people who only according to these sons who only according to Rebbe Lazar were they performing Kalayim. So that's why Rabbi Lazar says that they needed to be punished, and that's why he says that they were denied the inheritance of the brooch of their mother, whereas the rabbis say no, they didn't do anything wrong, and as a result, there was no reason to withhold the inheritance, but rather it was because it was a successful matanas shchiv meira or mitzvahs machmas misa, and so therefore that's why we fulfilled the gift of the iman de bnei Rochel, the mother of the sons of Rochel. Okay. So, Rebbe Levi, what's the bottom line? Oh no, so no. So now we're not yet to the bottom line. We now say have a statement that is going to lead us nicely into the next Mishnah. So Rebbe Levi says, Konin Kinyan Mishchim Meira Afilu B'Shabbos. That we will perform an act of a Kinyan act even on Shabbos for a Shchim Meira. But it's not because we're worried about the opinion of Rebbe Lazar. We don't paskin like Rebbe Lazar, but we will still do it. Elashema titrov daito. But we're worried about the health of the person who's very seriously ill. So let's take a look at the Rashbam. Last line in the narrow lines at the end of the line. V'lo lechush, and now into the first of the wide lines at the bottom of the Rashbam. L'divrei Rebbe Lazar. Masha Konin, when it comes to making the kinyan, lav de tzarach kinyan. It's not because any kinyan is necessary. Rebbe Lazar, like Rebbe Lazar says, kaimalan karaban, because we paskin like the rabbis. De divrei shchiv meira kiksuvin u'mesurin, that the words of a shchiv meira are like they're written and they're been handed over. There's no need to do it. Daito, but rather it's to lahafis daito. It's to assuage the mind. Kadesha lo titrof daito. So God forbid they shouldn't have a deterioration of a mindset. Conan, therefore, will do the kinyan dahashta samcha daita. We'll do that kinyan so that therefore they have a sense of being settled. And so because we want people who are in that this we recognize the stress of being very ill, and we don't want to do anything that would, God forbid, heighten that stress and thereby cause the person to die. And so this is effectively treated as the mental status of an ill patient is treated as a life and death issue. Very, very important to remember. Okay, so that brings us to the next Mishnah. Rebbe Lazar says, and now connecting back to the Gemara that we just said, B'Shabbos dvarav kaimen. Actually, when it comes to Shabbos, the gift of a shchimira does work. Because you can't write on Shabbos. So we're going to make a special rule. So when did the rabbi say that there's a rule of a shchimira? According to Rebbe Lazar, there's only one situation, and that is on Shabbos. Aval lo b'chol, but not on a weekday. And so let's take a look in the Rashbam. Rabbi Lazar Omer, im b'Shabbos chilek nechasav, if he divided up his property on Shabbos, as tiknu chachamim, then the chachamim would treat it shehu dvarav kayamim, to allow his words to be fulfilled below kinyan, without any kinyan v'ksiva, and without any writing. Shelo titruf daito, because we don't want, God forbid, anything bad to happen. Shemin adin, because really from the law, we don't actually do any kinyan and write on Shabbos, but so therefore we're going to say that we're going to allow it. But aval lo b'chol, continuing on in the Rashbam, sheyesh takana b'kinyan v'ksiva, because, well, on a weekday the person can engage in a kinyan and writing the lama titruf daito. So as a result, there's no reason to be concerned about their mental state. So as a result, we won't allow it to work, because you could always write. So that's fine. Whereas Rabbi Yeshua says the position of the rabbis, B'Shabbos Amru, no, it was on Shabbos that we say that a Shchiv Meira can do it. Kal v'chomer b'chol, but certainly you can do it on a weekday. So why can you do it certainly on a weekday? Back in the Rashbam, B'Shabbos Amru, Shedvarav Kayamin, we say on Shabbos that the words are fulfilled. Afal gav delekal amemar migo diyachal lehikanot. I think it says, where is that? V'lichtov ki lo avid nami kani. So on Shabbos, when we don't have the ability to say, look, he could have just written it, so therefore, and yet we're going to, and so therefore we should allow him even if he hadn't written it. Kal v'chomer b'chol. Certainly, we should allow on a weekday the kol haroy labila ein bila makebet bo, that we have a principle. This principle, although the wording of the principle is specifically said in connection with the Karban Mincha, that any situation where the mixing is capable of happening, well, then the mixing does not actually have to happen. Then this refers to the amount of flour and oil that are mixed together. That although the Torah talks about actually mixing the two, if you didn't mix them, as long as they were capable of being mixed in the volume that you have, well, then it's all going to be fine, and you don't actually have to have mixed them. But if you didn't have the ability to mix them, well, then bila ma'kevet, then you would require the mixing, in which case, of course, because you couldn't have done it and you didn't do it, you're going to say that that mincha is not a valid mincha. So that principle also could potentially apply here. That when we say that that on Shabbos you can't possibly have done the writing and the kinyan, and so as a result, if we say that we allow you to convey the matanat shchimera, well, then certainly when you could have written and given the document over, will allow you to do a matanat shchimera. That is a position of Rabbi Yoshua. Okay. And similarly, so kal v'chomer b'chol. So certainly, again, on a weekday, you'd be able to do it. Continuing on, kayotze bo. Now we're back in the Mishnah, the fourth line of the Mishnah. Similarly, zachin lekatan. This is in some ways a totally out of left field topic, but the nature of the machlokus is identical because it's based on this principle of kol haroy labila ein bila makebet. When it comes to a minor, one can acquire on behalf of a minor, the ein zachin legadol, but you cannot acquire on behalf of an adult. Divrei Rabbi Eliezer. Rabbi Eliezer is basically saying that if I want to make a kinyan for you, I don't have the ability to do it because you have the ability to make a kinyan for yourself. On the other hand, when it comes to, sorry for not scrolling, when it comes to when it comes to Rabbi Yoshua Omer lekatan amru. No, you can't. The rabbis allow us to perform a kinyan for a minor. Kal v'chomer legado. We should certainly be able to perform the kinyan for an adult. Again, because when it comes to a katan, the katan doesn't have the ability to make an acquisition for himself. So as a result, if we're going to allow that situation to work, well, then certainly if you could have done it yourself, we'll allow you to do it. And take a look in the Rashbam, ve'ein zachin legadol, sharei yachol lizakot ba'atzmo. According to Rebbe Lazar, the reason that you can't make a kinyan for another adult is because the other adult has the ability to make a kinyan for himself. Rabbi Yeshua Omer, and Rabbi Yeshua says lekatan amru. No, when it came to a katan, mishum dezachan lo shelo b'fanav, since we allow the principle of one to make an acquisition for somebody who's not present, but kol shekain legadol. Certainly, we should allow it for an adult sheyesh lo yad, because he himself has a hand lekabel in order to receive something, v'lezakos, and to take possession of something, and to be meritorious. V'shliach nami, and so as a result, the agent also matzi mashave, he has the ability to appoint. So since I could have been appointed your shliach and taken possession for you, well, therefore I should be able to take possession for you, even if you don't appoint me as your shliach. Okay, so Maslis and Mani, who is our Mishnah like? Because we actually are about to see that there is a Brisa that has two different versions of our Mishnah. And the answer is Rabbi Yehuda. It's Rabbi Yehuda because we're going to see two different versions of our Mishnah and in a brisa, and it's a machlokas about what everybody said. Rabbi Yehuda, Detanya, Rabbi Meir Omer. Rabbi Meir says Rabbi Eliezer Omer, and here we're back to Rabbi Eliezer as opposed to Rabbi Lazar. Although some people, let's see. Okay. Rabbi Eliezer Omer, Bechol Dvarav Kayamin, reversing the positions that we had, that on a weekday, Rabbi Eliezer says that we believe a Shechem Meirah, which of course would be different than Rabbi Lazar. Rabbi Lazar said something different. Because you can write Avalo b'Shabbos, but we would not uphold this principle on Shabbos. Again, this would be strictly applying very strictly the concept of kol haroy lebila ein bila makebet, because the Shechem Meirah could have written his documents, his words down, so we'll allow it to work on a weekday. But on Shabbos, when he couldn't have, well, then we'll say that when it's not fit for bila, when it's not fit for mixing, bila makebet ba, then we would say that you have to have the mixing. And so as a result, on a Shabbos, when you can't write, you need to have the writing. You need to have the kinyan. Rabbi Yeshua, on the other hand, Rabbi Yeshua says, Omer, as we turn to Kufnun Zayin Amud Aleph, B'chol Amru, it was said by the rabbis that Shechem Meirah works, Matanat Shechem Meirah gives, works on a weekday, the Kal V'chomer b'Shabbos, and certainly it would work on Shabbos, because writing is forbidden. And as a result, we want to give extra rights. So this Kal V'chomer is a little different. The point is that if the rabbis are going to establish something that works on a weekday, when there's a way around it, certainly they'll establish it on Shabbos when there is no way around it. Kiyotzebo, and similarly, Zachan Legadol, we're going to say that when Ve'ein Zachan Lekatan, that Divrei Rabbi Eliezer. Rabbi Eliezer will say that you can make an acquisition on behalf of an adult. Again, this reverses his position that we saw in our Mishnah, but you cannot make an acquisition on behalf of a minor. Why? Because an adult has the ability to make the acquisition himself. So therefore, he can't make it, but when minor does not. So as a result, we're not going to allow it to work. Rabbi Yeshua says, the gadol amru. No, we allow it to work when it comes to a gadol, even though he can do it for himself. Kal v'chomer lekatan. So certainly we're going to establish that he can work for a minor who can't do it on his own. So, and that was all Rabbi Meir. Now Rabbi Yehuda says, Rabbi Yehuda Omer, the machlokas was exactly as we saw in our Mishnah. Rabbi Eliezer Omer, b'Shabbos dvarav kayamin. On Shabbos, we will follow the words of a Shechem Meirah. Mibnei she'enu yachol lichta, because he can't write. Aval lo b'chol, but not on a weekday. Rabbi Yoshua Omer, b'Shabbos amru. On Shabbos is when they said it does work, but kal v'chomer b'chol. But certainly it would work on a weekday because, again, of the principle of a kol haroy lebila ein bila ma kevet bo. Kiyotzebo, and similar argument, Zachin Lekatan, an adult can acquire on behalf of a minor, Ve'ein Zachin Legadol, but you cannot acquire on behalf of another adult. Divrei Rabbi Eliezer, that's the words of Rabbi Eliezer, because again, Rabbi Eliezer says that we're only going to establish this as a decree with respect to a minor, but not when you could do it on your own. Whereas Rabbi Yeshua says, no, lekatan amru, kal v'chomer legadol. They said it by a katan, but certainly for a minor. I'm sorry, they said it by a katan, but certainly for somebody who's an adult, because he could have done it on his own. Now let's go back and take a quick look at Tosos, and then with that we will be done. So zachan legadol ve'ein zachan lekatan. Bottom Tosos kufnun velva mebet. Ve'im tomer lama ein zachan lekatan. So this, of course, is the wording of which and the little note beforehand notes that this actually applies to Kufnun Zayin Amud Aleph. That the wording of, according to Rabbi Yehuda, according to Rabbi Meir, was that Rabbi Eliezer's position was that one can acquire something for an adult, but not for a minor. And if you were to ask, Lama ein zachan lekatan, halo zachan la'adam shelo b'fanav, we just said that there's a general principle of zachan la'adam shelo b'fanav, that you can acquire something for somebody who's not present. And that seems to be the basis of zachan legadol. So why don't we say it for a katan as well? V'yesh lomar dekevan dezechia metam shlichus. That really, when we make an acquisition on behalf of somebody else, it is based on a concept of agency. So man dematzi mashvi shliach, one who has the ability to appoint an agent, yesh lo zechia. So for that person, one can make an acquisition. Uman de lo matzi mashvi shliach, and somebody who can't appoint an agent, namely a minor, Ein lo zechia. He has no ability to appoint it. Uman de islay zachan lekatan ve'ein zachan legadol. Well, what about the people who say the other way? Why do they put it in that direction? Sphirale kaven de gadol yachol liknos, because the adult has the ability to make the acquisition on his own. Lo tikkun le rabbanan. The rabbis had no need to make a decree. Zechia. They had no reason to make a decree to allow it to work, kamo b'katan, like with a katan. So, okay, so that brings us to the Mishnah now at the top of Kufnun Zayin Amud Aleph. And this Mishnah, which is the final Mishnah of and the rest of this chapter, is going to deal with the concept of how we should handle the situation where multiple people in the family die at what appears to be the same time. And so the question is, I'm sorry, it's not the last Mishnah in our parak, but this is the last topic of our parak, and we are going to see that we're going to talk about this concept of what happens. How do we deal with a situation where we're unsure who died first when multiple people died, and the ordering of the death matters. So, for example, if the son dies before the father, so then the estate would and the father has no other sons and no daughters, then well, we'll get to it in detail. I'm not going to want to go ahead of us. We'll stay tuned for tomorrow's daf, and we'll see the kinds of situations where this will specifically matter, and different people will inherit depending on the different order and how we should handle those situations. Have a wonderful, wonderful day.